Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. We're just going to wait about another minute for people to start coming in. And then this is getting recorded as well. So tomorrow I'll send out a link to the landing page with the recording and any other links that we talk about during the course of our workshop today. We're going to go for about an hour, and that may include some Q&A, but if we've got to go over with some questions, that's totally fine too. Laurie and I can be here until 1:30. And so if the questions are fast and furious, we can stay on past 12 or past 1, but if we're all wrapped up at 1, then that's good too. So I am going to get started. Laurie, are you ready?
I am. I'm super excited.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so I'm really excited to be sharing this topic with you today because for me, and I can tell you this right now because we're going through a major renovation at home and a move at the same time, I am more aware than I have ever been that outer order gives me inner calm. And right now, my outer space is very unorderly, and I feel it on a psychological, emotional level every day. But I've always felt that. I always have felt when my home is disorderly, out of whack, disheveled, like whatever way you would describe it, cluttered, it really affects me. And being a mindfulness teacher, I really think that it's important that we tune into not only how we can be in the present moment with some mindfulness tools, but also how we can set up our lives to make mindfulness easier. And so I was really excited to have Laurie. We were on the podcast together it's probably more than a year ago now. And then,
it was during the pandemic. That's when
that's
I
right.
At the
right
height,
at the beginning.
like at the height of it.
Yeah, that's right. So I love what she's up to. I love her. I just love the way she teaches. So let me just tell you a little bit about who you've got here as my co-teacher today. So Laurie Palau, she is the author of Hot Mess, A Practical Guide to Getting Organized. I love that cover. You must have had so much fun creating that. She's the host of a weekly podcast called This Organized Life, and her wisdom has shared all over the country, all over probably in Canada too, in places like Family Circle and the New York Times. And then there's me. I'm a certified mindfulness teacher. I'm a certified habits coach. I also have a podcast called 60 Mindful Minutes. And this summer, my book, Better Daily Mindfulness Habits, will be coming out. And there aren't any anti-clutter habits in there. So maybe I'll have to add an extra chapter at some point.
You could do a bonus, a little bonus chapter.
That's a good idea. That's like a free extra chapter.
Yeah, for sure.
So what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to be really tag teaming depending on our sort of mode and specialty. But Laurie's going to be talking about what clutter is and really helping to understand how it is that it is a problem that many of us have in our lives. How to do a big reset, so that day where you finally are fed up and you grab everything out of a closet or everything off of a counter and you restore everything to perfection. And that lasts about 24 hours. So we're going to talk about how to do daily and weekly maintenance so that we can stay on top of our perfection. We can keep that order in place as much as possible. And then I'll be talking about effective habit building and how to create habit recipes. So, and we'll be taking Q&A. So why don't you take it from here?
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Well, thank you, Kristen, for putting this together. This is awesome. I know we've been talking for quite some time about doing a workshop, and I'm so glad that it's finally here. Whenever I talk to people, because again, I think clutter is it conjures up such images for people, usually negative images when we think about it, like people start to cringe. And when I started my business, which I've been doing this to kind of give you guys some frame of reference. So I started my business in 2009, and I saw it really as an opportunity for me to be able to help people I was in a season of life where I had 2 small kids, I had a husband who traveled, and I had a lot of friends who were also in like kind of mom mode, whether they were stay-at-home moms or they were working moms, and they were just overwhelmed with stuff. And my mission at the time really it wasn't like a minimalism movement or let's, kind of like home edit things and make it look all beautiful. It was really about how clutter made us feel. It was about starting to reclaim some like calm and, like you said, that inner calm that you get when your outer space is organized and is not filled with stuff. And so I just started going in and helping people that were struggling and creating small little systems along the way. Throughout doing this work, I quickly realized that there's really a much bigger emotional component to clutter than we are giving credit for. And we're treating the symptom, we're treating clutter as the symptom, and we're treating that as the problem, but really it's just the symptom of a bigger issue. And so when I talk about clutter now, after years of doing this, and I talk about this in the book, and obviously I've gone through it in workshops and on the podcast, is I look at clutter into 3 distinct areas just to kind of break it down. And the first one is the physical clutter, which is everything that we all kind of imagine. It's the laundry, it's the dishes, it's the toys, it's all of the physical stuff. And that's what it's probably the easiest one to quantify and define because you can see it. I've got a sink full of dishes. It's stressing me out. I've got a pile of mail that's unopened, things that are in there that I know, and that's causing you that physical or emotional reaction. But the second type of clutter that we talk about is emotional clutter. And emotional clutter usually stems from guilt or fear. It could be guilt that my kid made this, someone gave it to me, my mom passes down, it's my grandmother's, I don't really like it, but I feel obligated to keep it. Or it could also be guilt that I spent a lot of money on this, and even though these shoes kill my feet, I feel bad getting rid of them. Or, that these jeans cost a lot of money, and I know that they don't, after my COVID weight, they don't fit me anymore, but I need to like live in my closet. And so we hold on to things for that reason. The same token is you can have fear, that whole what if I need it? I need to hold on to paper because what if I get audited? What if I need this, I have to have like 3 extra sump pumps in case my basement floods or something like that. So there's all that emotional kind of mind games that we play with ourselves that wind up resulting in physical clutter. So understanding and unpacking that will kind of unlock that door to helping you get rid of the clutter. And then the third type of clutter that I talk about is what I call calendar clutter. And calendar clutter is what so many of us struggle with, is that being overscheduled. And I see a lot of kids struggling with calendar clutter because they're going from school to activities. And it was interesting because I did a whole kind of observation during COVID. And originally when quarantine first happened, I thought this is going to be great. This is going to reduce so many people's calendar clutter because we're not going to be running in 50 different directions. But really all we wound up doing for a lot of people was swapping it for other things because there were so many other obligations. And so when you look at it, it's about the goal to reduce calendar clutter, and this is what I talk about, is trying to build that margin into your time. Because when we look at our calendar like a closet and we're constantly adding new things in without removing anything, it eventually, you can't see the forest through the trees. And that's what happens with our schedules. And that results in that anxiety and that stress and that overwhelm. So even if it's something and sometimes calendar clutter could be a little bit more dangerous because you don't see it. It's not as easily quantifiable about saying, well, I folded the laundry and I put it away, and now I have that sense of calm and relief. Calendar clutter is, you have to be really deliberate in helping to start to change some behaviors. So that's really how I define clutter. And I think understanding that and looking at it through that lens allows you to start to give pause when you're struggling of saying, can I name this? can I name where this clutter is coming from first? And then once I can do that, I can then begin to develop a proper strategy to help reduce it. Because I think just like in life, we want to fix everything, right? We just naturally want it, like we want it to go away, we want to fix it. But without identifying what the root cause is, that's where we get frustrated and kind of throw our hands up in the air. Does that make sense? Okay. So, so again, I think the first step in developing any habit is identifying where is it coming from. And really the second step is saying, what do I want? Like, what really are my goals? What do I want this space to look like? What do I want my schedule to look like? What is the pitfall? Because what stresses me out, or what I think an organized life should be, might look very different. So I think it's really personal. And one of the things that I do when I talk to people is really sitting down, like, what is it? What do you want this space to function as? Where do you see your life getting better? Like, where would you like to incorporate more integration? I just recorded a podcast before hopping on this call or on this workshop. And we were talking all about work-life integration and what does that look like? And in different seasons of our lives, things that are busier and we are really focused in on here, but it's okay if we know that it's got an end date. We can plow through if you know that the finish line is right over there. But I think what so many of us do is we're just kind of blindly going through and we're just without that direction. So if we can start to carve out a plan of action that gives us that motivation to kind of move on. And if anybody has any questions along the way, feel free to hop in. And so once we can start to kind of establish that foundation and figure out, okay, what is it what type of clutter do I struggle with? What do I want? What are my goals? Then you can begin to say, okay, what are the steps that I need to take that are going to work for me? What are the steps that are going to be easy for me to implement? And Kristen, you and I have talked about, working in tiny habits and creating small little steps along the way. And I think that is really so important for people, because especially when it comes to clutter, a lot of times we get to this breaking point where we see, it's that final, tripping over that toy, or that final collapse of the stuff in the garage, or fill in the blank. And we're like, we're done. We've had it. And people just dive right in. And if you can begin to say, okay, let me just work through this framework step by step and be really strategic, that helps you stay motivated and know where you can take breaks and how you can continue to see incremental progress. Because where I think a lot of people lose steam is they're just going about it mindlessly. And so what we like to do and I say we, because my team and the other organizers who I coach and mentor, is really teach these actionable strategies. So first we're looking at the type of clutter, and then we're saying, how do we want this space to function? What are the steps that we're going to take? If it is physical clutter, what's the approach that we're going to use? And Kristen, feel free to jump in and with anything that you want to add. So again, I think the first thing that you want to do is say, this is the area, and I'm going to look at this individual space. I like to start with a clean slate. And so I use what I call the ESP model. And the ESP model stands for empty, sort, and purge. And when I talk about my ESP model, people are like, empty, I have to empty my entire space, and they freak out. And that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing something in a way that you can see results quickly. So if you are saying, my pantry is really stressing me out, you're going to start really small, and you're going to do a shelf or a cabinet or a fill in the blank, one area. And what you want to do is if you can look at something with a blank slate, it allows you the freedom to imagine what you want it to look like. A lot of times we'll go through our closet or we'll go through a cabinet and we'll just kind of like peruse through and go, okay, this looks expired, or I don't wear this anymore. But it's really hard to get that whole kind of imagining visual of what you want if you are surrounded by the clutter. So if you remove it, it allows you that freedom to really kind of say, okay, this is the best way that I can lay that out. So that's what I first recommend. Is step one would be to empty it. The second step would be to sort it. And these are the 4 piles that I use. And the beauty of this simple model is that you can apply it for any area of the home or your office that you are looking at. If you're dealing with any type of physical stuff, is you're going to start it into your keep pile, which is anything that you want to keep in, this is the key, in current rotation. So anything that is in your current space. That would be staying in pile 1. The second pile would be anything that you are going to donate. So that's stuff that's in good working order, but you no longer want it, need it, use it. So you're going to put that in a donate pile. The third pile is the recycle pile, which could be obviously, whether it's trash or you're recycling something sustainably, that's broken, damaged, you're not going to use it. It's not something that's worthy of donation. So we're going to put that into that third pile. And then the fourth pile, which is the one that is really not accessed enough, and I have a huge emphasis on this one, is the relocate pile. And the relocate pile is a huge freedom giver for people that struggle with a lot of emotional clutter, because relocate means you're going to keep it, but it doesn't necessarily need to live in that space. And a few things can come into that relocate pile. So let me give you some practical examples. Your kids are fighting and they have Nerf guns and they're fighting and they come upstairs and you're like, I'm done. And you grab the Nerf gun and you stick it in the top of your closet. So it's out of there. 6 months down the road, you're going to clean your closet. You find the Nerf gun. Now, you might want to throw that. You might want to recycle that. But let's assume that you're not going to. So then you would relocate that to somewhere else. So it's something you want to keep. Or you could say, I was hanging a picture and I was lazy and didn't put the hammer back. So you want to relocate it. It doesn't need to live in that space, but you're going to relocate it somewhere else. But relocate could also be memorabilia. And that are those important keepsakes. And I'm using the word important underlined. Those are those important keepsakes that you want to use that are things that, whether it's, you know, your kids' christening gown that's still hanging in their closet, or, you know, your favorite sweater from when you were, I don't know, in college, whatever that you want to keep, something that's sentimental, but it doesn't need to live in current rotation. So finding that space and having that, this is going to relocate, and knowing where that's going to relocate is really freedom giving, because it allows your keep pile to really thin out. Because what happens is a lot of people naturally don't want to make mistakes. I mean, most people, and that is what holds people up a lot when it comes to clutter and organization and going through that process, is because they don't have clarity in the system, they just take inaction. And so what I talk about is 5 main clutter pitfalls. The first one being procrastination, just that I'll get to it later. The second one being indecision. And that goes again back a lot with that emotional clutter piece, is that I don't know what to do with it. So I'm not going to do anything, because you can't make a mistake if you just don't do anything. And that can go true for, I got a piece of mail and I'm not sure, do I need to keep this? Can I get rid of it? I don't know. So I'm just going to kind of put it over here. Or my kid brought this home from school. Do I need it? Do I not need it? Are they going to ask for it? I'll just put it over here. Or I'll just stick this in my closet, or I'll shove this in a cabinet, because you don't know. So that indecision really is a gateway for clutter. So if you can start to identify like, yes, I tend to struggle with that, then we can kind of ask some follow-up questions, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. The third one, which we touched on, is guilt, right? We talked about the guilt. Somebody gave it to me, cost a lot of money. I feel like a bad mom or a bad daughter, fill in the blank if I got rid of it. The fourth one is overwhelm, and overwhelm can come from any number of causes. But we talk about, again, this goes into that outer order, inner calm, where you're just feeling overwhelmed and not knowing where to begin. So a lot of people that I talk to, they are at that point, they're at that breaking point, but they just don't know where to start. They're so overwhelmed with the process. It just seems so daunting that it paralyzes them from taking action. So using things like your 4 piles, your organizing ESP, those are the small little steps that will allow you to start to break through that overwhelm, because you're breaking it into a tiny, small little habit. And then the fifth clutter pitfall that I talk about is time. It's really carving out that time. And that plays in with that calendar clutter piece, because in order to do any of these things, from whether you're talking about mindfulness meditation, you're talking about wanting to, spend time with your kids or your spouse or your friends or whatever it is, or declutter, it requires time. So you're either delegating something to have somebody else do it, or you need to build that margin into your schedule. And if we don't have that, and our calendars are bookended from morning till night with activities or obligations, which all could be super valid, there's no room for us to be able to take action on these other areas that are causing us stress. So we have to kind of figure out what's that ratio, what's that magic number that we are going to say, how are we going to approach this? Yes, go ahead, Kristen.
All right, I have a question about the relocate. So
go for it.
My mom's on here, so I'm glad she's here, because she might want to chime in too. So I grew up in the North, and we had crawl spaces. Mm-hmm. And in reflection, I can see that a crawl space is just the emptying zone of, I wrote down, deferred decision making. I don't know what I'm going to do with this, so I'm just going to put it in the crawl space. Am I right, Mom? You can come on and give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And so we lived in that house my whole childhood. And I can tell you, do you agree that there was a tremendous amount of deferred decision-making that lived in our crawl space? And it was a huge crawl space. So how do you kind of police yourself a little bit when you're doing that relocating, that you're not actually procrastinating, or you're caught in indecision, and you're relocating a problem that is just going to be way, 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 way dumpster level bigger down the road?
That's such a great question. And it's something that I deal with often. And I was actually just having a conversation with one of my clients yesterday about this. Hand to God. What it boils down to, and I'm going to oversimplify it, it comes down to the why. Why are you relocating it? What is your why for keeping it? Are you relocating? If you are holding on to the kids' artwork, is it because you think that you're going to eventually want to is your goal to pass it on to your kids when they grow up, and then here's your tub of, kids stuff? Are you holding on to the kids' Thomas the Trains because one day you want to give that to, you want to give it to your grandchildren? What is your why? Are you holding on to it because of indecision? Or are you holding on to it because of fear of, will I regret it? Will I need it? So I think it comes down to that why piece and talking that through. And that goes kind of into that emotional clutter. And the conversation that I was having was with a client that has been a long-term client. I've been with them through moves, through kids, through the whole nine. And they have a lot of space, which is also, you talk about this crawl space, and, whether it's an attic, a garage, a guest room closet, whenever you have space, it can be, as much of it could be a blessing, it can be a curse, because it's very easy for you to, again, have that delayed or that deferred decision making. And when you don't have to make those decisions on the spot, it makes it easier for you to just put it off. And then before you know it, you're looking at a crawl space from top to bottom. And like you said, at that point, you're like, just get a dumpster and get rid of all of it. And so we see this, and I see it a lot. So I have a client that is in the process of doing they're about to embark on a renovation for this one section of their house. We'll call it a wing, where their boys live. And right now, there's a big unfinished space that we've got tons of kids' memorabilia and sports and other stuff, random things. And again, it's kind of been that, we'll get to it later. And I said, we really need to be proactive in going through this and saying, what are we keeping? What are we getting rid of? Because what I don't want to happen is, and I see this with so many people, is we delay it so much till you're under the gun to make a decision. And at that point, we have such decision fatigue, we just say, get rid of it all. And so you've basically been storing this, and for what? Because the whole point of storing it is to either enjoy it, share it, pass it along, remember it, honor it. And if it's just being there just because, then it's not doing its job. So it's about putting in the time of, what am I doing and why am I putting it there? So, and it's hard for people because, and the thing that I want to kind of just add on is, like, this sounds great on paper, right? Like, this is one of those things that this sounds great on paper, but when you're going through life and you have all of these, constant influx of things that are happening and decisions that you need to make for in the moment of what you're dealing with, this seems like something that you can put off. And I understand that. So what we try to do is stay ahead of it and do it in little increments, which I know you and I are both huge fans of, so that it never really gets to that point. Now, obviously, if you're at that point, my advice to people is start now. And I think that surprises a lot of people. I say start where you are and start building that muscle memory moving forward before you go backwards and say, let me go back in. Let's just start building some healthy habits moving forward. So, for example, if you're a mom with small kids and let's say you've been saving every piece of artwork that the kids have brought home, now you say, okay, I'm going to ask myself, is this something that is this keepsake worthy? Is this something that my kids are going to want, or I'm going to want to look back on? Most things are probably not. Like, you want to keep it, like, for me, I would keep the rule of thumb I kept for my kids were, if it was a self-portrait or they wrote a story about themselves or something that was really defining about them. But random scribbles, I didn't keep. Other things that it could have really, when looking back on it, could have any kid did it. If your kid's name wasn't on it, could you tell who a kid did it? If the answer is no, get rid of it. And so that was like kind of my benchmark for doing things. And I also try to be really intentional about saying, I want my kids to have a snapshot of their life when they, for them to look back on and not pass along that overwhelming torch. I always say, talk about passing the clutter torch. And so what I did is I just had like a binder, and in the binder, I had sections from, the younger grades. And once they get older, there's not as much stuff. And so I now, if they one day, when they have their own homes, I can pass off a, two binders, like an elementary and then an upper. Here's your stuff. And then they can decide what they want to do with it. And it's not overwhelming to them. And I've gone along the way to help do it. And you can apply that whether you have kids or not have kids. You can look at it with photographs. You can look at it with any type of, again, toys, clothing, housewares. Like, is this something that somebody else is going to want? And generationally, this has changed and evolved over times. I mean, Noreen, I'm sure when you were younger, your parents, everything was passed down, and there was a lot of, this is our family china, and this is our furniture, and there's a lot of kind of family heirlooms. And generationally, and I'm giving a very generalization, but we've gotten away from the volume of stuff. And I see now people not wanting to take on the entire dining room set, or that thing. I don't need all of these things. I don't want all of these things. And so there's a shift in what people are holding on to and why. And so again, understanding that the value that you place on it might be different than the value that the people that you're going to be, your next generation, is placing that value on. So yes, please. Oh.
I have a perfect example of that. And Chris will remember this too, is my coffee table. So my aunt, who used to live with us when I was about 6 years old, bought a coffee table for my mom and dad. And it was a very big deal. It was solid wood, and it was a very big deal. And so that coffee table has stayed and stayed and stayed. And I finally got it from my mother, and it sat in my living room. And I finally, I moved it out of my living room because, it was old. It was an antique by then, and I didn't have an antique type house. So I moved it into a bedroom, and I piled stuff on it. And when I couldn't stand it any longer, my sister was visiting one day, and I said, you know what? I can't stand this coffee table, but how can I get rid of it? Aunt Mary bought it from mom and dad, and, blah, blah. So Meryl said, no, we can't. I'll take it. And now I moved in with my sister, and I've got the goddamn coffee table again, still there in the living room.
And that's a perfect example of when things they go from being a blessing to a burden, and you don't want that. And I think, as a parent, I don't want the stuff that I'm doing, even if my intentions are good, to become a burden to my kids, and vice versa. I want it to be something that this is something that they want, and that they don't feel overwhelmed, and that they can say, this is something that I'm enjoying. I can manage this. This is a manageable thing. And I always like to use the mindset of, if this isn't serving me well, if I am not enjoying this or using this, somebody else can. And so it's hard when you have something that, again, this was a family heirloom, keepsake, but it's big. It's not something that you can just tuck away on a shelf. It's a piece of furniture. So how can you and for me, it would be like, how could I repurpose it? How could I reclaim it? How could I morph it into something? And if none of that checks the boxes, then I would, for me, because I don't struggle with a lot of emotional clutter, I would say, you know what? Aunt Mary, right? Is that her name? Aunt Mary would want somebody to enjoy this coffee table. She would not want this coffee table to just be a clutter collector. So I am going to bless somebody else by paying it forward, because I am sure that somebody else is going to enjoy it. And so for me, I would be okay with that. But everyone has to kind of get to their own realization. And that is why I really do a lot of talking to people about what's going to give you that peace. Because I think decluttering an organization should be relieving stress, not adding to stress. And when I start to see people have an increased level of anxiety around the process, that's when we need to hit the pause button and say, let's address why. Because in the grand scheme of things, this is not like, there's so many other bigger things that that are stress inducing. Like, we are giving our stuff too much power. And so how can we break it down into small increments? How can we break it down in a granular level to not minimize it, but to simplify the process so that we feel empowered to make those decisions and feel good about them?
I had a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just curious. I'm pretty good with like getting rid of things, and if I feel like if it doesn't fit in the spot that I have for it, then I have to get rid of it in my mind. I have a 9-year-old that disagrees completely, and so I struggle with helping her. She likes to organize things, but she doesn't want to get rid of anything. And so I'm wondering, so like I'll kind of go, okay, well, let's just put it in your closet. So when you're talking about artwork, I'll just kind of put it in a big bag and then in the closet. And then later when she's not around, I might toss it, like months after when she doesn't know. Is that okay to do?
So here's the thing. We've all thrown away stuff in the dark of night. Okay. I mean, I'm not going to say I haven't done it. So yeah, I mean, is it okay? Yes. Is it ideal? No. There's a few things going on there. And I actually love this question because so much of the work that I do, especially in the past few years specifically, is really surrounded by looking at the relationship between different personality types, and how we deal with things isn't always how our spouse or our kids, or even if it's in a work setting, our coworkers deal with things, and really understanding that piece to have that common language so that we can address it. Because I have I have 2 daughters, and my younger daughter used to like to save everything, and she struggled with a lot of emotional clutter.
She feels like her things have feelings.
Oh, so does my daughter. Well, everything has feelings. Yes.
Which I'm thinking is I'm like, it doesn't have any feelings. Those are your feelings.
Okay. So I can completely relate to this 100%. If you're a podcast listener, go back and listen to episode 138 of my podcast. It's the one with Logan on it. And she talks openly about how everything she has had feelings, and she's gotten better. So some of that comes with, thank you, Kristen. Some of that comes with maturity and age. Some of it is maybe how she's wired, and the fact that she might be somebody that's more feeling intuitive versus thinking intuitive, or more strategic action driven. And so that is a real thing. And so again, the logical approach to say, this is what we're going to do, isn't going to be enough for them to have that buy-in. It's having that buy-in that empowers people to want to make those decisions. So again, there's a couple things to answer your question. One of these things is you could give her a keepsake box that she keeps in her room. Could be a pretty box that's decorated, like you could buy one at Home Goods or Michael's, or give her a shoebox and let her decorate it. It doesn't matter, but it could be a little bit bigger than a shoebox. Have a box that she keeps for those random scraps of paper and pencils and bottle caps and whatever things that she wants to keep. But set some parameters around, like, we have to, go through, once it gets filled, I want you to go through it, and then we can make some decisions. So giving her that space so that it's not out. So it doesn't have to be an either or, it could be a both and. I think you do need to, it is important though I think that the piles are really important, because I know for my daughter, she liked to look at things. She liked to be able to access. And that's why having a keepsake box in her room that allowed her, which is different than your big memorabilia bin that's like you put the kids' stuff in. But this is something that she would keep in her room. She could keep it in her closet or whatever, that she could pull out and look at, and then she could put it back away. But having them go through the process of those 4 steps, and you could say, what are we keeping? What are we donating? And a lot of times kids will be better equipped and more amenable to getting rid of things if they know it's going to another home. So yes, I think it is hard. And there were many nights of screaming where I was like, it's a broken pencil. It doesn't have feelings. But I think it's a matter of them setting those parameters and saying, can we give these? Can we donate? Whether it's them finding an organization or donating stuff to their old preschool or to your church, or, maybe having them do a little bit of work. She's 9. Where would you feel comfortable donating these? Like, can we get these stuffed animals to the SPCA so that they're not going in a landfill? They're not going in the garbage. They're not just ending up for kids that are more emotionally attached. And then they will have peace. Like my daughter, as much as she has emotional attachments to things, she knows, oh, if I'm outgrown this, or she has her one memory bin of clothes of like, this was my favorite fill in the blank. But the rest of it, it's like, I'm going to donate to my friend's daughter who's younger. Oh, I can give these to Lucy. I can give these to so-and-so. And she's totally good with that. So it's giving them what that next step looks like. Because I think for especially kids that do have that emotional attachment, it is hard for them when they think it's just a final ending. So does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's helped for me to say, let's give this to someone who will play with it and be so excited to see it. And that will be their number one toy, because it's not her number one toy anymore, but she doesn't want to get rid of it. So that has helped with her. But I mean, I guess my ultimate thing was like, at some point I just have to chuck it, or I just have to say, like, enough, it has to go. And it's way easier for me to do it when she's not looking.
Yeah. And I think, again, for me, I have parameters, I had boundaries over where we were allowed to have our kind of creative license of things, and where like the clutter wasn't allowed to be. I also, when they were younger, and again, not everybody has like the luxury of space or whatever, but I had hung up in our basement, which has morphed over time, but it used to be like a complete playroom, and we had a craft table down there, and I did one wall of a cork board that I just did. And so all of that artwork that came home, I hung it up down there. And you know what? They were happy. I didn't have to see it on the daily because it wasn't there. It wasn't just it wasn't just randomly like plopped on her dresser. And so it had a designated home. And then eventually, the paper starts to curl and it starts to fade, and then it goes. And so I think it's a matter of saying, okay, where am I going to let it go? And saying, we don't want to have your dresser filled with stuff. It makes it too hard to, keep clean, or to dust, or to whatever it is. And logic is going to work to some degree with some kids, and other ones it's not, because they're not coming logical. It's all emotional. At the end of the day, it's you're the parent, and you can steer the ship however you want. But my goal was always to try to teach and empower my kids to do this, so that I'm teaching them these life skills and they feel it doesn't become counterproductive, where they go the other direction of everything I have is just going to get thrown away. And I mean, I'm over exaggerating, but do you know what I mean? And say, I feel good about this, and making decisions of this has served its time and now it's time to go, and we can do it. And other thing that I'll do is, I did this when my kids were younger, is I would have a bin, like a random bin, that anything that I thought, like, even if they were like, oh, we need this, if I hadn't seen them using it, playing with it, whatever, I would put it in there, and I had like a temporary staging area. And if they didn't ask for it, and you could set up, it could be a month, it could be, I wouldn't go more than a few months, but I used to do this with toys where they were like, no, I need it. Cause I always walked through the process with my kids. And if I didn't think they were playing with it, I put it away. And if they didn't ask for it within 3 months, it was gone. So that's like another thing that you could do, again, assuming that you have some sort of.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I do. Space. I mean, I wait months and months. It's probably 3 months or something, but then I'll go in there when she's like watching TV downstairs, and I'll be like, okay, she hasn't asked or pulled about, you know what I mean? Like, her life hasn't changed. She probably doesn't even remember it. So. And
I think the other thing that you can do with kids, and she's starting to get to that age, is, again, there are things that I know as my girls start to grow and mature, and wanted more independence and they wanted like a big girl room and things like that, where I was like, okay, if you want this, like you want to have a little seating area in your room, for example, we're going to have to get rid of some of these stuffed animals because we need to make space for it, because we have to make choices. So it's very much like, okay, if this is what you want, I'm happy to do this, but we need to, again, there has to be a trade-off. So if you want to work towards having whatever, fill in the blank, then we need to make some decisions here. And I found for my daughter, empowering them to make those decisions, giving them a few small choices to choose from. It's like basically you're choosing from column A or column B, gave them that motivation that they were in control, but it was still within the boundaries that I had established.
Yeah, something I do that worked really well was like if she wants something new from the store, I'll be like, what are we getting rid of at home then? Like nothing new comes in unless we get rid of something. The problem is the gifts. You know, all these gifts that we get that I don't have that control over. So if she wants 5 new shirts, I'm like, okay, when we go home, you have to get rid of 5 shirts.
Right. Well, see, and I go the other way. See, and that's great. I go, okay, before we go shopping, if she wants to go shopping, we're going to have to thin out so we can see what do we need to get? What does it make sense to spend our money on? And that's, sorry. Okay, we're going to wrap this up and then we're going to kind of do Q&A at the end. Sorry. I'm digressing. I apologize. But I think, again, one of the things that you can do again is you be in the driver's seat as a parent, or, you know, having those conversations about what are my goals? What is it that I want from this space? And how am I going to work to get there? And I think that's where that proactive planning and really saying, what are the steps that I'm going to put into place and how am I going to execute it? So kind of going back to establishing the pattern and the habits, is there isn't a one size fits all. And Kristen and I have talked about this. There's a lot of ways that you can approach things, and different strategies are going to work for different people. And I'm a big believer, and I know Kristen is too, about doing things in small little increments. And so whether that's 15 minutes a day or 5 minutes a day, whatever that looks like, that's great. But even if you're the type of person that likes to actually do things in one big chunk, like reserve it, there are still little action steps that you can take each and every day moving forward to prepare for that big, Sunday decluttering detox type of a thing. And so what I try to do is say, again, what are the top three things? If it's whether it's removing physical stuff, whether it's checking something off on your calendar list, what are the things that I can delegate? What are the things that I can remove altogether? What are the things that I don't need to do? How can I prioritize? Because I think what happens is we oftentimes are just so busy dealing with what's in front of us that it dilutes really what's important. And it's that taking that pause. And, Kristen, we were talking kind of right before we went live about, we're all so busy in the moment of doing the things that sometimes we lose sight of, okay, we need to slow it down and really kind of say, what is this? What do we need to do to move forward? And when it comes to decluttering and organization, it's coming back to that why. Why are we doing this? Like, what's the reason that you want? What's the reason that we want our kids to have a clean room? What is the reason? Like, are we doing it because, are we going to get a gold medal? Sorry, my dog just walked in. So anybody that's just saw my door open, my dog just walked in. Are we doing it because I know that my kid has trouble sleeping, and if they're in a calm space, that will hopefully help them better? Why do we want our kids to hang up their stuff so that I'm less stressed and I'm not screaming every morning when I'm trying to get them out the door? So it's less about the actual action of what you're doing and the why behind we're doing. So I always encourage people to think about their why. Why do we want to establish these habits? What is the reason? Because once we have that is easier for us to stay empowered and motivated to continue on them. The purpose of doing a mindfulness meditation, it's not just to check it off the off your to-do list and go, well, I meditated today, but it's about, how does that make me feel? What's the reason? How does that stabilize me mentally, emotionally, spiritually to do those things? And you can apply that same philosophy to your clutter.
Awesome. I know I can throw my hand up too and say I have about 10 more questions, but
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. We'll have lots to say at the end. So I'm excited to hear from Julie. I saw you had your hand up, so we'll circle back to you when we're done. So I think I'll pivot now and talk just a little bit about kind of habit philosophy. And then we can take some of that know-how and start applying it to after we've done the big purge, the big sort of reset. How do we start to maintain some of these things? So I'll show my screen again. So when we're creating habits, a couple things to keep in mind is we want them to be very specific. So I'm going to use the example of my counter space. So like Laurie said, I'm going to pick one area that I'm going to develop some clutter habits around, or some anti-clutter habits around. And I'm going to pick my countertops, because I can tell you that for me, that is an area that makes me sweat a little bit when I start seeing piles of mail and stuff someone got at a birthday party, and a can that should have been put in the recycling box, and dishes, and on and on and on and on and on. So I want to be really, really specific about my habit. So if my habit I'm creating is that every night before bed, I'm going to restore the counter to zero, whatever that is, whatever the reset produced, that I'm like, this is what my ideal counter situation looks like. My new habit is that every night I'm going to declutter my counter space. So I want to be really, really specific about that. And I might even be so specific as to say every night at 9 p.m., or maybe every night while I'm doing my 2-minute toothbrush, because I have a little timer so I remember to brush long enough, that's when I just putter around the kitchen and do that. So we want to make sure that the habit is specific. We also want to make sure that it's effective. So like, is it actually producing the outcome that I want? So Laurie, to your point, maybe decluttering at 9 p.m. at night actually stresses me out. Like I do that, but I've kind of ramped myself up with movement and maybe in a bit of a flurry. And then I look over at the dining room or the living room, and then I start over there. And next thing you know, it's 10:30 and I'm falling into bed, like I've just survived a battle. So maybe that won't be effective. So we want to make sure that the habit actually not only produces the outcome that we want on the outside, but that it's producing the outcome that we want on the inside. It has to be realistic. If I'm someone who is usually somewhere at night, I'm not. I'm almost always at home at night. 9 o'clock would be a perfect time for me to do that. But say sometimes I work nights, or say sometimes I'm always having to pick one of my daughters up from soccer, or say, my sleep schedule has been really nutso and I fall asleep sometimes at 8 o'clock watching television or something. I want to make sure, like, is this something I can actually do 8 out of 10 times? So 5 out of 7 nights a week. Is it anchored? So we want to make sure, is this action specific to an environment that it makes sense? So it is. So I have clutter and it is in my counter space. I don't want to just say I'm going to declutter everywhere, because now I am not getting specific enough, and I haven't attached this behavior to a very specific environment. And I want to make sure that it's appropriate, like it's appropriate for me. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about maybe it isn't appropriate because it's going to throw me into a tizzy doing all of that activity at 9 o'clock at night. Maybe that's going to be too much for me. So we want to make sure that it makes sense for you. And then the last thing is we want to make sure that it's tiny. And I know Laurie has referred to this a few times, and this really cannot be emphasized enough. We want to make sure that when we're building habits, especially, we can always scale them later, but when we're building them, that we keep them very, very small. And the reason why is that big, grandiose, from this moment on, I am going to declutter my entire house every night before bed, is going to need a lot of motivation, which you may have at first because you got the house back to perfection and now you're very motivated to keep it that way. But it's also going to take a lot of willpower because there's going to be some nights where you don't feel like decluttering the whole house. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you were out and you're just getting home at 9 o'clock at night. Whereas if I just say this sort of L shape around my microwave and my sink, that is going to be my tiny habit. If all else fails, I am just going to declutter this one space. Now I can do it without needing a lot of energy, a lot of willpower, really forcing myself to do it. And I can kind of do it whether I feel like it or not. So that part is really important as well. So to really reiterate that, we want to build habits without using motivation or willpower. If you're someone who identifies as, I don't have a lot of self-control, welcome to the human species, first of all. And second, fine, don't use it. Don't actually have that in your toolbox. Having to use willpower and self-control all the time to make ourselves do things is a losing battle because it is a finite resource. We will get tired, we will get sick, we will get unmotivated, we will have our schedule change. Something will happen that will make the thing we want to do harder. And unless we've automated and we have to make ourselves do it, we're in for a battle that we will eventually lose. So another thing to add on to that is that we want to feel good about the things that we do. And that doesn't mean that we have to like the things that we do. Some people actually might like that sort of puttering around, decluttering. They might actually enjoy it. And sort of intrinsically, that's a feel-good behavior. Other people might just feel so good when it's over and they see the space brought back down to that sort of zero perfection that, again, it's intrinsically rewarding. But other people, neither of those are the case. And so we have to actually manufacture some sort of feel good. So after you finish decluttering, stopping for a moment and just saying, that feels good. Or yes, I did it. Actually initiating a serotonin drip, being able to tell your brain, look at that. That felt good. Let's do it again. You're going to wire around behaviors that feel good. They're going to embed themselves more deeply into your brain because what gets rewarded gets repeated. And then the last little sort of hack I'll tell you, and I think, Laurie, you'll agree with me on this, is that it's way easier to build daily habits than weekly habits, and weekly habits are way easier to build than monthly habits. So if at all possible, break a bigger habit into daily chunks. And I'll give you an example. Forever, I wanted to have the habit of taking my supplements. I have probably about 8 different, like vitamin C, and I've got a ginger supplement, and, like all of these little jars of vitamins. And I thought, okay, here's what makes sense. Once a week, I'm going to pull them all out, undo all the caps and do my 2 here and 3 here and set it up for 7 days. It never happened. Never happened because weekly habits are hard to make stick. So while it is really inefficient to take these vitamins down every single day and take out just what I need for the day and then put them back, I do it every day. So keep in mind that efficiency or this perspective that efficiency is important, it doesn't trump effectiveness. If you can't do it with consistency on a weekly basis, then it doesn't matter if it was efficient because it's not producing the result that you want. It's better to break it down into daily habits. So when we're talking about decluttering, instead of having a big Sunday, okay, everybody, all hands on deck, it might make more sense, I see you nodding, Laurie, to have a 9 p.m. or first thing when you're home from school, or right before I start my day would be another example of how to break that down. Last thing I'll say is that it's really important that, and I've said this before with the anchoring, is to adhere a new habit to an existing habit. So let's say, for example, you're someone who makes coffee. I don't ever, would never have to remind you to make coffee. You would never, ever have to say, oh yeah, I gotta set a little Siri reminder in the morning to make coffee. You get up and like a robot, go into your kitchen and you do your coffee thing. That is a well-worn habit. So you might want to look at your life and see, where do I have some habits that are like almost never go away? Like I brush my teeth at the same time every day, same time, same place. I make my coffee. I am at dinner at the same time every day. I walk a dog at the same time every day. And how could I attach an anti-clutter habit to that? So let's talk about the coffee. So after I turn on my coffee machine, I will remove 5 things from my countertop, or I will do a quick walk around my living room and do a pickup. So you're taking something that you're already doing, so a behavior that you don't have to think about, and then you're adhering the new behavior to it. So the old behavior is cueing the new behavior. So that habit recipes is a real fundamental component of Tiny Habits, which is taught by BJ Fogg in his book, Tiny Habits. And his habit protocol is what I'm certified under. So I think the habit recipes is pretty mind-blowing. And I think it's a really great way to hack into what you're already doing and add new habits to it. So that's kind of like a quickie run through of what I wanted to make sure to share. And then I'll let you, Laurie, if you want to add anything to that, and then we can take some questions.
Yeah, I just want to say, and you and I, so I'm actually reading Tiny Habits right now. And yes, and I just read that chapter, and it's so true. And it's interesting for me to see it in practicality of things that I've done that relate exactly to that and why that's worked. So it's funny because you talk about the supplements. And so for me, I have now gotten in the habit, as soon as after I may have my coffee, I then take because it is triggered automatically. And the other thing that I want to just again reiterate based on what you said is, I know a lot of times with the weekly habits, where I can see people running into trouble is people have the best of intentions. I see this a lot with laundry, where people will go, I'm just going to, this is for families. Like if you're a single person, you could probably do laundry once a week and be fine. But like with people with families that you're doing like a lot of loads of laundry, I years ago started adopting the like 1 load a day, which worked for me, right? And we did it once a day. And I had a lot of friends that say, you know what, I'm going to build it up and do 4 loads on the weekends. But then as soon as and if that works for you and you can find that method works for you, that's great. But where I've seen multiple people fall into trouble is as soon as life happens, and it will, and you can't, for whatever good or bad, spend Saturday or Sunday doing that habit, then it sets you back. And you're faced to play catch up. And so that's where we fall into problems. And so just again, going back to that whole doing things in small and ongoing increments for what I call a lot of these life skills, is it helps you to not fall behind. Because when we are building up to say, and again, even if we're not doing it to procrastinate, even if you're doing it with the full on intent that you're going to do it, if you continue to just set those expectations, then you can be become easily deflated and defeated. And that will then again affect your motivation and your confidence and all of those other emotional pieces that come in versus the tactical stuff. So that's all I want to say.
That's great. So we're at 103, so we'll officially end. But like I said, Laurie and I can stay on for Q&A, and that'll all be in the recording as well. So if someone's like, oh my God, I have to go, please make sure, you go and attend to whatever other commitments you have, but we're going to stay on, and then all of that will go on the recording. So we wanted to open it up. Does anybody have any questions or anything specific that Laurie can help you tackle? Go ahead.
So getting back to the coffee table, so the emotional clutter in general is it's a huge problem for me, and Chris will definitely attest to that, as will all my kids. And so the coffee table aside, I mean, you know, my sister and I have discussed the coffee table many times, and we're still trying to deal with that, but we've decided we are definitely going to, there's a really cute little store in town that takes, you know, old stuff and sells it. You give it free and they sell it. And it goes to a good cause. The money goes to a good cause. So yeah, that's where it's eventually going to go. But I have a huge problem with having been handed down photographs. Now that we're all using our phones these days, we don't have that problem anymore. But if anything, we have a problem trying to actually produce photographs. But I have boxes of photographs that have come all the way down from my grandparents. And these things are like, how do you get rid of those? And yet when I look at them, I think, do my kids have to try to figure out what to do with these at some point when I go get on to the next whatever?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there's and photographs are kind of like, they're one of the biggest things that I hear from people. And the first thing I tell people is, when you go back to kind of what is your time worth, there's so many places and resources that can either digitize those, chronicle those for you, that I think it's well worth it. I know for us, there's places that you can go and send your photographs. So my recommendation is to have them chronicled in some sort of, if you want to have it in like books, you know, if you want to have them in books, you can obviously have them put on thumb drives and whatnot. I think if you want to there's nothing like flipping through an old photo album. I mean, I think there's something to be said for that. And so I know like our local photo store, there are sites that you could send it away, but a lot of people aren't comfortable sending those keepsakes away because they're not replaceable. Let's be honest. If something, God forbid, happens and in the mail and they get lost somewhere along the way, they're not replaceable. So a lot of people are leery about doing those mail order type places. But I know that there is an organization that I've worked with before called Scan My Photos, and you can send a box of photos to them and they will put them in a book. You could get it on a thumb drive. They used to do like a DVD also if you wanted. But I know my local photo place, they will do it. And so you can just bring it there and then decide if you want to keep the originals or not. I personally would, especially when you have volume, like I know my girlfriend has like literally like Rubbermaid tubs of photos.
Yeah.
If you want to sit there and put them in a photo album, I personally wouldn't want to do that. I would want to send them and have them scanned and have them made into, if you've got 2-3 kids and you want to have a couple copies made and give them to the kids, and then they can just have them as family memorabilia. And then that releases you from the physical clutter as well as that emotional component.
Yes. I don't know. We'd have to ask Kristen how she would feel about that. Go here. 3 photo albums dating back to the 1800s. Go nuts. I know you love them.
What I'll say though is that I think that I know someone who is involved who's my age, and she's involved in a very large like photo reclamation project for her family. And again, like photos that go back. And it was one of those things where her aunt had sort of put out like an all points bulletin, like, I have all these photos and I am not, like, I give up. I'm not going to do anything with them. Does someone want to take this project on, or should I just throw these out? And it just so happened that my friend was just at a season in her life where she was like, I want this. It was actually a welcomed project, and she ended up absolutely loving it. And she had a different eye for technology than her aunt did. And so she found a really easy way to convert everything into, and so she's been picking away at it for about 2 years. But yeah, it was just that someone put their hand up and said, does anyone want this? Because I'm not going to do it.
Well, and I think that that's a really good point. And this goes for anything. It's about having that conversation, because I think we also have expectations of what we think people are going to want. And we spend a lot of like mental bandwidth trying to figure out a solution to something that might not need solving. You know, we're trying to we're like trying to figure it all out by ourselves, but you might be holding on to something for no, and you could easily have, just like you said, pass that off to somebody else who has an interest and wants to do it. And then there you go. And then you don't have to lose any sleep over it. And I think that, again, that can apply to so many different areas because there is so much emotional. I'm just looking, Cindy has a question. Suggestions on handmade items from my mother. Lots of quilts, afghans. I mean, again, I try to keep that same general rule of thumb of like, am I using this? You know, I ask myself a bunch of like questions like, am I using this? Is this something that, you know, are my kids using it? Is it something that I want to keep a few of them? Like, again, if your mother-in-law knits or crochets on, and you have like 25 blankets, I don't think you need to keep those. I think you can pare down and keep a few that you want that, you know, obviously if there's ones that you're using, that's a no-brainer. And then if there's others that you're not using, but you might want to keep them because you do want to have some sort of emotional, like sentimental, that's fine. But I think you have to just set that boundary and say, we're going to allot this space, this shelf, this whatever, and then anything like that, we're going to gift them or we're going to, you know, donate them, whatever you want to do. But I think it's, again, also having those, you know, sometimes those tough conversations and figuring out it doesn't make you a bad person, but if you know that you have limited space, you can only like, this is where I have to draw the line.
I think that's a really important, I want to just sort of circle that thing that you just said. It doesn't make you a bad person, because I think sometimes you can get handed down something that doesn't mean anything to you. It was just, you ended up with it and maybe you don't even like it, but you have this sort of sense of like, this should matter because the person who gave it to me, it mattered to them. And I love like just hitting that pause button and saying like, I'm a good person, even if I don't like this chair and it doesn't mean anything to me. And then maybe having a chance to go back to that person that gave it to you and say, I have this thing, I know it means a lot to you and that's why you saved it to give it to me, but it doesn't mean the same for me and I don't want it anymore. So what do you think I should do with it? And again, like you said, having that conversation, because maybe, you know, go back to that person and they're like, oh, I don't care, just donate it. And here you've been keeping it all this time thinking, oh my God, how am I going to ever tell my aunt that I don't want this painting? And meanwhile, she's like, oh, I don't care, just donate it. Doesn't matter to me anymore. Yeah, what painting? Imagine that. What
yeah.
painting?
I mean, well, we tell ourselves we have this unhealthy sense of obligation for everything. And it gives stuff more power than it deserves. And I'm not saying that you should be cavalier. And when someone gives you a gift, especially if it's something that they made or has some sort of history or story to it, you don't want to just be like, you know, whatever, and not pay any attention, because again, there was thought, there was intentionality with that. But at the same token, just because something has value to somebody else doesn't mean that just because they gift it to you, it has to have that same level of value.
That totally strikes a nerve with me. My grandmother is downsizing right now and we're helping her move. And so she's trying to pawn off. I say pawn off, it sounds really rude, but she's trying to
pass the clutter torch.
Yes, because she cares deeply for these things, even though they mean nothing to me. And there's something I didn't realize. I was feeling like I wanted to take something for her, not for me, not because I wanted it at all or care, but I just felt like, oh, there's something I should take something, you know, to make her feel better. And I was talking to my mom about it, and my mom said, don't take it. Just say no. And I was like, what do you mean? And my mom was like, no, don't take, because my grandmother, anything she gives you, she wants it back 8 years later. and you don't have it.
Yeah.
And then she makes a big deal out of it and talks about it for an hour, like a year. Like, are you sure? And you're like kind of lying. Like, I think it's upstairs. And knowing like you are. And so my mom's like, yeah, it comes with strings. Like, just say no. And I was like, and I went back later that afternoon to help my grandmother more. And she was like, well, what about this? And I was like, nope, we already got everything we need on that department. And she was like, oh, okay. And then she's like, well, how about this? This would be, and I just kept saying no. And then she kept just moving on. And I was like,
sometimes we just need permission. And what your mom gave you was permission to say no. And we sometimes feel that way with just getting that permission to let go of stuff. Just like you with the coffee table, Noreen, like, I'm giving you permission. Like, it served itself well. It did, but it's not bringing value to you. It's not being served well. So here's the permission to go to allow that coffee table to come bring somebody else joy and happiness and memories, because we're not honoring. It's like, I know I used to talk to people all the time, and I would go in and they would have, gifts stashed in the back of the hall closet that was somebody gave them something. And it's like, well, I feel bad getting rid of it, but and I go, but it's like in a box in the back of your closet. So, really, and you're not bringing it out. Like, what? That's just not enough, good enough reason. And so I think, again, that just looks at where that the strongholds that our emotions have with our actions, and being able to just address them. And sometimes having that outsider perspective, and it doesn't have to be a professional. I mean, it can be, but it could be a friend. It could be, like you said, even if it was your mom that just had that gave you that advice or recommendation, or just position something in a way that you go, I never thought of it like this. And sometimes it's just that subtle little trigger that gives you that, the strength and power to kind of make those changes or decisions.
Well, that's why I think it's so good to do some of these projects with an outsider of some kind, whether it's a friend or someone who doesn't have an emotional attachment to your stuff. How do people hire people like you, Laurie? Like, how do people find someone like you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways. I would say the majority of people who I know that work with professional organizers, and I also I have a network of people that they're part of it's a membership program. It's called the SBO Partner Program. It's totally free for you guys, but it's a vetted group of independent organizers that are all over the country. And they all own and operate their own independent companies, but we all have the same philosophy. And so we've kind of vetted them and put our little SBO stamp of approval on them. So I think at the end of the day, it comes from word of mouth and who you trust, because you're talking about a really intimate relationship. I'm not trying to over-importance myself, but you're trusting people with your stuff, your emotional vulnerability. And for a lot of people, clutter is like a dirty little secret for them, even though it doesn't need to be. That's how people feel, and that's their perception. And so, I know when I work with somebody, whether I'm doing consulting and coaching or working somebody one-on-one, this is something that I take very I take that very seriously. And the people that are in my membership group as well, the other professional organizers, all feel the same way. So most people, if they've worked with a professional organizer, now that it's becoming more mainstream of the industry, I think people talk about it more vocally and say, oh, I'm looking for somebody. Do you know somebody that does this? And I think, like most things, it becomes through word of mouth. But again, if you don't know anybody, that's why we created this network, because I wanted to be able to provide a resource for people that live outside of my geographic area, and that say, hey, my mother, sister, best friend, cousin lives in this place. Do you know anybody? So I wanted to be able to do this. So that's a large part of what I do right now, is really connect up and help other professional organizers kind of build their businesses and connect them with people that are in need of some outside professional, support.
Yeah, when I send out the email tomorrow with the recording, I'll send the link to the episode with your daughter, because it was really great. I'll send a link to the network, So I'll get that from you today.
Yep.
And then I'll send in information about your Enneagram course. Do you want to just speak from
Oh, yes. So I think it blends so nicely with the work that you do, and especially even connecting the dots with the whole tiny habits and your whole model with BJ Fogg. So I've always said, just to kind of give you a really top line again, the Enneagram is a framework that looks at the why behind we do things. It looks at people's personality through motivation, not behavior. And so when I look at, why are some people naturally organized? Why are some people clutter blind? Why do some people it not bother them and other people just are natural list makers? Why do some people get stressed out about clutter and other people couldn't care less? So really looking at that whole buy-in piece, because again, you could tell people what they should be doing, but if you don't have that buy-in that this is something that you want to do, then it's not going to be successful. In the same way, motivation isn't enough, because we can want to do things, but if we don't have those practical, tactical steps of how do we build habits, how do we build those good behaviors that are going to allow us to get to our goals, that's not enough. But if we can understand a little bit about why we do what we do, why my daughter might struggle with emotional clutter, why I might be super type A and want to control every situation, that's a gateway into giving a clearer lens of how our relationship with clutter stems to be. So I was introduced to the Enneagram about 4 years ago and just started looking at it just for my own personal development. And the deeper I went and started kind of peeling back the layers, I started really seeing these connection points with people's relationship with clutter, kind of looking at the same framework of the physical, emotional, calendar clutter. So the course that I put out, and I'm calling it like a digital course, but it's really like a framework, really looks at the 9 different Enneagram types and how each one of them individually has a relationship with clutter and where you might thrive, where you might struggle, and how you can build up that muscle that might be a little bit weaker. So it's not like, oh, I'm an Enneagram 8, so I'm just destined to be a hot mess. That's not it. It's like, okay, I know that these are great qualities about me that can help me in the areas of organization. And I know that these are some things that I could potentially be some roadblocks for me. So what are some specific habits and strategies that I can build to support me in who I am?
So great. I'm definitely going to sign up for that. So I'll send the link to that in the email tomorrow with our recording from today. And I think that's all of our questions. Oh my gosh, Laurie, I could have you talk for like at least 3 more hours. Like, I know there's so much more in there that I want to know.
There's a lot, but we'll have to do some, another workshop. We'll have to do a 2.0 and we can dive deeper into some of the specific habits maybe, and really apply them to some specific
it's so helpful. It's so helpful, and it's something that we all struggle with in some way or another. So I think you brought a lot of peace to people's lives today, and don't we all need a little bit more of that?
Yes, we all do.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. It was such great collaboration with you, and thank you guys all for being here.
Thank you guys.
I'll get that recording out tomorrow. Bye, Mom.